Well, welcome back to the Sean Trey Show. I have a really awesome guest with me tonight. Now, would you like to introduce yourself and tell people who you are and what you do?
Sure. My name is Rob Hoffman. I'm a producer, engineer, mixer, songwriter, acupuncturist, PhD student, dean of a Chinese medicine program, father, husband. I think that's everything.
Sounds about right.
Could throw a couple other things, but that's about all of them.
Well, it is interesting. Like when you ask people who you are and what you do, it's a loaded question, man.
Yeah.
There's a lot that can be on there.
Who I am and what I do, they're separate things. Still trying to figure out who I am, but I definitely have a list of things I do.
Yeah, much more esoteric.
Yeah,
but with the one of the things is like I knew you from acupuncture school. I studied Chinese medicine as well, and I just had Nasambu on a couple weeks ago, which was pretty cool. Yeah. But she as well is another person who's there was a post last night that was by UTA. They were talking about one of their artists, and they said multiple hyphenate. And I was like, oh, that's a very fancy way to say a person who wears many hats.
Sure.
I was like, ooh, I'm a multi-hyphenate, I guess. I mean, I don't know. But, I knew you as, and then the other day I posted a photo with my daughter. And my daughter was sitting mixing with me. And I can't believe that throughout the entirety of acupuncture school, I didn't know that you were into music. I don't know how. I mean, there was a lot going on. There was a lot of information.
You're a little busy when you're in school. Yeah.
Right. But talk to me about that. How did you get started in music?
I'm a little older than you, so I grew up in the 70s, and back then schools had music programs. So I started, on recorder, and then eventually moved to trombone and saxophone and guitar and piano and drums. And I had, for every billion out there who's going to space, listen, schools need music programs. And we had a tremendous music program when I was in school. And I really wanted to play saxophone, but the music director didn't let me. And we were all in fifth grade. So this was 1980. Sax was on everything. There wasn't a hit song on the radio where saxophone was not it. So every boy in fifth grade wanted to play saxophone. My teacher looked at me, or the music teacher looked at me and said, "You're too tall. You play trombone." And I was like, okay. So I played trombone because you're 10. You don't want to say no to a teacher. And then 2 years later, the teacher switched and another teacher was a director. And I went to her and I said, "Look, I really wanted to play saxophone. Can I switch?" And she's like, "Actually, you can, I'll teach you saxophone, but you can't quit trombone." And I was like, okay, deal, done. So by the time I graduated in eighth grade, I had a rack behind me. I had my baritone sax, I had my trombone, and I had my guitar. And depending on the songs, I was kind of multi-instrumentaling, at 13. So
that's really awesome.
It was very cool. And then went to high school. My school did not have a music program. I had switched into a small private school when I was in high school. But about my junior year, we got a music teacher, and he started a jazz band for us. And that's when I got kind of wrapped up in jazz. I was playing piano, guitar, and drums in the jazz band. So I was always a multi-instrumentalist. Went to college. My parents were like, "No music. You're going to be a lawyer." So I agreed, but then took every music class I could. And then I'm like, sure, I'll be a lawyer, just so I can go to every kind of music class and sit in on every class I could. And actually, it was very freeing not to be a music major because I could pick and choose. I could cherry pick the classes I wanted to take.
That's a really good point too.
Yeah, they were really. The music department was like, really, "What are you trying to do? Who are you?" And I actually I graduated, I guess, with a minor, and I had to petition to the department because I hadn't taken any of the requirements, but I'd taken more than enough credits. So they gave me my music minor, kind of, not happy about it. Yeah, yeah, sure. And then I get my first, again, I kind of I walked into it all sideways. In my junior year, I got an internship at an ad agency in New York because I didn't want to go into business. I didn't want to go into law. I wanted to be a musician. But my dad set up this meeting for me with a friend of his whose wife owned a boutique agency, and I took the job because they said to me, like, oh, you're a musician. Maybe if you're interning for us, if a music thing comes up, we'll have you write something for us. And I was like, done. I'm in. I'm here. So I worked the whole summer for free, as interns do back in the day. And sure enough, by the end of the summer, they're like, we need a piece of music. Can you give us something tomorrow?
That's actually awesome.
I was like, yes, I can. But tomorrow. So I literally, it was in Manhattan in New York. I left my job at 5 p.m. I went to Sam Ash on 48th Street, where all the music stores were at the time. And I bought whatever gear I didn't have. I had a bunch of, I was like a band guy. I had keyboards and stuff like that. I had a 4-track tape recorder. Yeah. But I went and bought a DAT machine and a new drum machine. I maxed out my student Visa card. And I stayed up all night and wrote this music. And I came in the next day. They picked 3 of them, and they gave me a check that day. And I went home to my parents, and I'm like, see what I can do? Here's the check. And my dad was like, oh my God, how did that even happen? So that was the beginning days. That was the beginning of it all. And then I convinced my parents I needed to go to Full Sail Recording, which was a production and recording school in Orlando, Florida. At the time, this is 92. If you wanted to work in a big studio, you had to know SSLs, you had to know the Neve. There was no Pro Tools, of course. No.
Yeah.
Logic was probably Notator at the time. And there was the synclavier. So really, to work in a professional studio, you had to understand kind of the large format stuff. It's a different world today. Yeah. But at the time, that was a deal. So I went to Full Sail. Got a job at the Hit Factory in New York right after that. That's kind of the whole.
That's awesome.
That's the beginning piece.
Well, no, and that's one of the things that that you talk to people, and again, it's a common theme that comes up in film and movies and music. Like, I was born in '79, so I'm like that. I got both. Even when I'm coming up, I was coming up analog, and I switched it into digital. And I was able to see some of that. But it's interesting for people who were born in the '70s, and '60s. Like you want. It was still much more prohibitive in ways, because you had to learn the specifics. And it was like let's look at, if you wanted to make a recording at that time, you had to have some gear that was prohibitive to buy. It wasn't cheap per se. And it was not like people did not have home studios. I mean, it was rare,
very successful people had it, and that was it.
Yep. And they were expensive.
They were crazy expensive. I mean, just a Studer tape machine, back then, $40,000, $45,000 just for the tape machine. Maybe you got an MCI, probably $25,000, and an MCI console. So you were still spending $50,000 before you even plugged anything in. I mean, it's just an insane thought. And I had a 4-track, and that was that was a pretty big deal in high school to have a 4-track cassette recorder, not even reel to reel. When I was in college, I got an 8-track 1/2-inch, and that again was that was huge,
That's a big deal.
Yeah, and our school we had a 1-inch 16-track. So, and this is the crazy thing to me, is that this is not that long ago.
That's the crazy part.
We're not talking 50 years. We're talking 20, 25 years. It's a crazy. The leap is insane. And the first digital recording I ever saw was when I was in college. Steve Jobs, you remember, for a while was out of Apple, and he started a company called Next, N-E-X-T, and he put out a computer. Yeah. And that computer had digital inputs. So you could record something on DAT, drop it into the Next, and do a 2-track edit and bounce it back out. And we did that. My music professor, who I did an online class with him this past winter. I taught for him. We're still friends. We recorded the school orchestra doing Mozart's Requiem, and we edited in the Next and added reverb, all digitally. And it was this is 1990, 91 maybe. This was beyond what anybody could even consider. And just doing a simple edit, just chopping out a section and putting a replacement in was
forever,
it was hours. Now you're just like,
I remember some of those early movie editing software. My friend, we were in college, and it was a similar type of situation as 96. And we were like, my dad was telling me, I wish I had listened to my dad on this one, because my dad was like, Sean, we got this. My dad worked at the university I studied at, and he's like, we've got this new major. It's digital media technology. Oh my God, you should check it out. It's really cool. Yeah, you should look at it. There, people can make movies. And I was like, I don't want to make movies. I want to go where all the people are at, and and where it's interesting, where I can make money. And my dad's like, this is going to be a fun career. And my friend helped me make a movie of literally the most embarrassing. If I ever get famous, I'm sure that video will come out.
Yeah,
most embarrassing video ever. Find it. And it was, oh geez, and it was something I submitted. I tried to get on MTV's Road Rules, and that was the show, and they had everyone submit like their bio video. And I was so proud of my video. And my friends were like, well, what's special about you? And I was like, well, I'm a black belt jiu-jitsu.
Awesome.
What's the other thing that's special about me? I'm a Christian virgin. That was
This is great. I'm shocked you didn't get on.
I kid you not. It's like, I was just like, it was like this. And I was just like, and I thought they were like, this is going to be shocking. They're going to try to, they're going to spin on that. Now I think about it, they would have been like trying to like introduce me. Go in this room. Go check this out.
Totally. No, you would have been thrown into the fire for sure.
Yeah. But like, God, it's so embarrassing. I know that will come out someday.
Yep.
But like, it was really, I mean, I sat there and watched him, and now I think about the quality of that edit. I could edit a video like that in 10 minutes. Oh, yeah. Like literally with the software we have now, and the amount, and everything. It took him 2 days of slogging to cut this thing down. And I sat there and watched him, and it was like any transition was a nightmare, anything like that. And that's not that long ago, 20 some odd years ago, and 25 years ago. And it was a chore. It was a chore.
It was huge.
Versus now, man.
You can do it on your iPhone. You can literally edit a movie on your iPhone. My first analog edit. So when I was in school, we had 2 semesters of electronic music, kind of learning the basics of recording. And we did some edits. We would basically like record a monologue, and chop it up and do fun stuff with it. But my first professional edits, I was working with an engineer named Bruce Swedian, who had recorded Michael Jackson and Quincy Jones, and he's probably the most famous engineer of all time. We were working with Quincy, and every song Quincy records, they're like 9 minutes long. And then he chops out the best sections and kind of reconfigures it and puts it in the order that you hear to a 4.5, 6 minute song. That's kind of the way he works. So once we would print this 9 minute mix, they would listen, and Swedian and Quincy Jones and Rod Temperton would decide like, okay, this chorus at minute 8 needs to go to minute 4, and so on. And they'd kind of reconfigure the song then. And Bruce would look at me and go, he'd call me Robski. He'd say, Robski, you want to do this one? I'd be like, Bruce, you've been editing for 50 years. Like, how could I could do it, but it'll take me forever. Like, you're the god. So we get about halfway through the record, and we get to an edit, and Bruce says, Rob, this one's an easy one. You do it. And I'm like, Bruce, how can I even come close to competing with your editing ability? And he's like, not this time. You do it. So I sit down at his 1/2-inch Ampex with Rod Temperton on one shoulder and Quincy Jones on the other shoulder, and Bruce behind me laughing, knowing that I'm sweating, that I'm dying here. And it was, and in hindsight, of course, it's not pressure, because if I screw it up, we can just reprint. Right. I'm not editing the master. We're just editing the 1/2-inch mix, the mixtape. But still, so I'm rocking, as you do with tape. I'm going back and forth on the thing and marking with a China marker. And of course, now Rod and Quincy are getting in on it. They're like, Rod's like, I don't know if that's the kick drum. That sure sounds like the snare drum to me. Are you sure that's the one? And Quincy kind of being like, I think you're on the wrong side of that beat, man. You might want to check your. So they just tortured me. God. And of course, it worked out fine and all of that. But sitting there under pressure again, kind of false pressure, but still pressure to have to deliver.
Quincy Jones sitting behind you pressure is very real pressure.
It's pretty real. And I was probably, that was summer of 95, I think. Yeah, so I was 25.
That's awesome.
Yeah, August of 95, I think. So, yeah,
That's
those
really
fun moments. And then the worst edits, the scariest edit I ever saw, thankfully I didn't have to do it. One of the very first recording sessions I was on was with Al Jarreau and Kathleen Battle.
Okay.
Steve Gadd on drums, Marcus Miller producing and playing bass, Joe Sample playing piano, Bashiri Johnson playing percussion, and Michael Brecker on sax, a whole bunch of lightweight musicians, right? No, the most insane cast you've ever seen. And I was just the second assistant on that session. So, operating tape, coiling cables, doing nothing. And they did 2 passes of My Favorite Things, the standard. And we're all listening in the control room, and it's very clear the first half of the second take and the second half of the first take need to be put together to finish the song. And the engineer kind of...
Here's the crazy part, right? Here's the crazy part. Like, I was comping vocals the other day, and you just you draw a little line and it pops it up into the mix.
Nope.
And it's smooth and it sounds beautiful.
Yeah.
But the idea of going back to tape and bringing these two things together.
And that's this engineer. You could see the look on his. I mean, he turned white to have to cut the 2-inch tape, right? With all of these amazing musicians in the room watching over your shoulder was he was definitely freaked out, and he did it and it was fine. But again, the pressure in Pro Tools, you've got 900 levels of undo. I mean, you can just keep undoing to get back. Yeah. But in tape, I mean, if you mess that up, you have a little wiggle room to put the edit back together, but still messing up back then, and then having to tell Steve Gadd and Michael Brecker sorry, can you guys do that again? I killed the edit. Yeah. We just don't have that pressure anymore. Thankfully, I think
it's so different. Well, there was a story about I remember I was on a shoot, a movie shoot when I was in LA, and the camera team were telling me this story. And again, I don't know if this is anecdotal or if this is true, but that there was this story of this one kid who had been working as a camera assistant, and his job was storing the film. It was just, that was it. He would take it, they would finish, he would run it to the camera truck, put it into the cases that protected it from the elements.
Lock it up and all that, yeah.
Lock it. That's what you do. And I mean, and on some sets, that's not a big deal, going back and reshooting a day.
Yeah.
But, on a multi-million-dollar blockbuster, or imagine a Michael Bay movie. Imagine you lose a day of shooting on a Michael Bay movie.
Yeah.
And that's what this story was, is that this kid actually he stored it improperly, and they lost 2 days of shooting. And and that was the story. I don't know if that's true, but I mean, I can't even imagine the idea of those stunts, and right now they've got, they literally have a person on a big set, pull the chip out, hand the memory card out, hands it to someone,
this little plastic chip,
and slip it in, this little tiny thing, slip it in, and it's backed up immediately. Yeah. They have a data wrangler that's live, and they're double backing it up onto multiple hard drives, simultaneously. Yep. But back then, that tape was God. That film was God. It's and the idea of having to, and you go look at an old Hitchcock movie cut, they were cutting the film.
Yeah.
It was being cut
masters
and spliced together with tape,
Yeah. No, it's insane. We had for Michael Jackson's record, I worked on History in 94, 95, and we had 1,800 tapes.
And I love the fact that you literally just dropped that you worked on Michael Jackson History. It was just a thing that happened.
Yeah, I've had
1,800 tapes. How many tapes?
Career. About 1,800, I think. Awesome. Yeah. We had about 12, if I remember correctly, 12 to 1,300 2-inch reels.
Oh my God.
Yeah, and then a bunch of half-inch digital masters. And then hundreds of DAT tapes with rough mixes and stuff like that. So yeah, it was and we had a full-time librarian. We had a guy that was his gig, is just archiving all of this and putting it into a FileMaker database and having the archive. So if we said,
Yeah.
oh, we needed so-and-so's performance from this date, he could just pull the tape out of the vault.
I remember when I was doing research like in university, and people were like, well, you need to do a research paper. And I was like, okay. All right, so you got to go to, and I was a history major because I like stories. I didn't like doing the rest of research. I didn't want to do my PhD in history. They're like, you get to live in a library. I was like, no thanks,
for
man.
like
I
10
like
years.
reading. I like information, but like at that time, like it was all microfiche. It was all where everything was condensed down onto these, which is still something I'd love to know how they make that stuff. It's like
and where did it all go? Where is all the microfiche?
Right? It's got to be in some type of database somewhere, or hopefully it got digitalized. But it's just such an interesting thing. And in the movie, what was it? The movie that they play with microfiche quite a bit was I think it was Zodiac.
Could be, yeah.
There's some cool shots where they're like moving around the
scrolling
microfiche,
through it,
like scrolling through it, for the newspaper articles. And it was just really interesting that it's such a different world right now. Like even like thinking like, so I'm trying to be, COVID has forced me to become a better audio engineer to help out my wife more. And just because like I have an engineer, and I won't edit this because he doesn't watch my videos. He's a nice guy. But he puts in the amount of work on a project to the value he feels in the project.
Yeah.
So I'm not hating on him, but when we do a song with my wife and I, he puts in a lot of work because she's important. But when it's my stuff that I send over to him, a song that I send over, it's
quick.
I love him, but he phones in.
Yeah.
He phones in. And it's understandable. That's what people have to prioritize their energy and time. But like it forced me to learn more, right? And which I thank him for that, because I thank people for forcing me to evolve, to become better. Anytime someone's difficult in your life, it's just actually can be a catalyst.
Yeah, for sure.
But so I wanted to learn more about Pro Tools. I also wanted to learn more about other DAWs, and I grabbed YouTube, and there are millions of hours of tutorials,
For everything.
what's a good vocal chain on Pro Tools, and there's about 300, 400 videos about great vocal chains,
for sure.
It's so accessible. And the fact that you have Pro Tools is insane,
Yeah, and try to explain that to someone, again, like when I was coming up, there was no backup. There was no way to go learn something except either to put in the time by the graciousness of someone else, put in the time, or find a manual, or do like you either went to school or you got lucky. There were so many times in my career where somebody, the studio manager or somebody would be like, hey, do you know how to do this? And I'd be like, absolutely. And they'd be like, great, you've got a session at 4 p.m. And I'd run down to the tech shop and open the manual and figure out like, okay, how do I do this thing that they just asked me to do? Like, you were always flying by the seat of your pants. But now you can just like, yeah, I can do that. And you can look up a YouTube video and you have, an idea how to do something, at least not to look completely lost, within a few minutes. It's just so different.
Yeah. I noticed that even for my daughter. Like my daughter's 5 and she hasn't started school yet. And just from, I utilize educational videos on YouTube, and Netflix has a bunch of great stuff because she's grown up in a country as a non-native speaker. Yeah. And so I need to supplement the Vietnamese she's learning, but I'm also having to supplement the English so that when she comes back to the States eventually with me to visit or whatever, she can speak fluently. Yeah. But her knowledge base at 5 is way beyond the knowledge base I had at 5.
Oh yeah.
She's talking about, she knows what tsunamis are. She has this, like, she was telling, just spouting off information to me. And I watched a bunch of nature videos. I thank my dad. Like, he made me watch nature videos and Nat Geo and stuff when I was a kid, but nowhere near the access to knowledge and information that that this next generation has.
Yeah, my son's the same
nuts.
way. He's into trucks. He's 4, and he just loves all things construction. But he knows, like, he can tell you what every kind of truck
does he watch
is.
Blippi?
Like, he started with Blippi. Now he actually watches. He watches the promo videos that the people who build the trucks, like Volvo.
That's awesome.
He watches their promo videos, and he's like,
"That's awesome!
Look at this hydraulic lifter on this one. It allows the front bucket to tilt to 45 degrees." Like, he can tell you, like, all the parts on these crazy. Like, I'll say, like, "Oh, look at that crane truck," and he's like, "No, Daddy, that's an auger truck." And like, he knows, this really high level information. It's intense.
bulldozer. And my daughter's like, "Daddy, that's an excavator." Daddy, that's a backhoe.
My son does the exact same thing. I call everything a bulldozer. He's like, "Daddy, that's a front loader. That's a backhoe." Like, right. And he's like very snarky too. Like, "Daddy, come on."
Right. Yeah. my daughter's so snarky with me, man. But she's right.
Yeah.
She has knowledge.
Yeah.
She has that information. And it's just interesting to see, as things, I often said this, like, imagine throughout history how many Leonardo da Vinci's were just passed over because they didn't have access to information. And we're entering this golden era where people can go out and make it. The challenge is that people can also become famous for really horrible things. Like, what was it? My friend sent me a video yesterday about an island guy, Florida guy. It's this video going around on YouTube right now.
I haven't seen it
where
yet.
it's these 2 brothers that I think are twins, and they're all tattooed up, and they've got this wild these 2 kids from Florida, and that's pretty much all you need to say.
That's all you need to know. Yeah.
and they're singing, "I'm a Florida guy, I'm an island guy," and it's really horrible. But the challenge with the internet is these kids are now everywhere.
Yeah.
And like, they're famous, and they'll probably get signed as an influencer somewhere by some talent company,
and that'll be it.
Yep.
It's ugly.
That's really sad.
So ugly.
So talk to me more about, you got out of college, you started working in some interesting stuff.
Mm-hmm.
How did you get into the recording industry proper?
So after going to Full Sail, it's funny, this is a story I like to tell. The last semester of Full Sail, I met with the guidance counselor, and he said, "So what's your," he met with everybody. He's like, "What's your plan? What are you going to do after music school?" And I was like, "Well, I want to get a job at a big studio in New York, and I want to work with Bruce Swedien and Jammin' Lewis and Janet Jackson, Michael Jackson, Quincy Jones. That's what I want to do." And the guy, he laughed at me. He's like, "Come on, man. You got to get serious."
You can't do that.
Everybody wants to work with them. If it was that easy, like, we'd all do it. And I'm like, that's what I want to do. So literally 2 months later, I start working at the Hit Factory, October of 93. January of 94, I start working with Bruce Swedien and Michael Jackson. 6 months later, I'm working with Jammin' Lewis and Janet Jackson. And then a year later, I'm working with Quincy Jones. So,
I want to touch on that because, like, that's something, like, there was a couple people that have popped onto the podcast that said this: don't be afraid to ask.
Yeah.
Whether it be God, the universe, yourself, don't be afraid to ask. And these people, like, there are so many people that are accessible, but we don't realize that those accessible, if you have skills, knowledge, and you're willing to put some work in, and you put the work in already. You had put the work in. Let's not like you were some guy off the street going, "Can I come here work?" You had studied and you put in time. But
I think the key is always, my dad instilled a great work ethic in me, and that was what set me up, because I went to the Hit Factory, of course, like, making coffee, coiling cables, all the usual. Even though I now had the school background, I still started at the absolute bottom, and there were a great group of assistant engineers above me who kind of recognized, like, I was the first one in the studio, the last one out of the studio. I was always willing to help set up and tear down sessions. Like, I, of course, running to get lunches and coffee and, like, whatever it took, I was always happy to do all of that stuff. And then when I was asked to do something, I knew how to do it. Like, Nile Rodgers was working at the Hit Factory when I was there a lot. And one day they changed studios, and he had his own Synclavier, which is this massive kind of Pro Tools-esque system. It's a huge rack with a keyboard, and I set up the synclavier without anybody asking me. And the assistant on the session is a guy named Andy Grassi. He's like, "Did you set up the synclavier?" And I was like, "Yeah, I did." And he's, how'd you know how to do that? And I'm like, I learned it in school and did that. But he noticed that, like, I had initiative.
You did it.
I put in the hours.
Yeah.
So when the reason Michael worked in New York is because of the Northridge earthquake. They were set to start at Record One in January of '94, and the Northridge earthquake happened. So they went to New York. And my friend Brian was the first assistant that was asked to work on the session. And then they asked Brian, like, who else would you want to work on this session? Because it's going to be 2, 3, 4 recording studios at the same time. And he said, "Well, you got to pull in Rob. He knows what he's doing." So it's because of Brian, this guy, Brian Viberts, who's gone on to win 5 Grammys and is a great engineer and wonderful guy. It's because of him, that I was asked to be on that session. But again, all those guys who I was working with at the time, they saw that I wasn't afraid of hours. I left well after I was supposed to have clocked out. And, I was just willing to do whatever it took. And I think that's the key. It's just putting in the hours. As in any career, it doesn't matter what it is. You just have to put the time in, and eventually you'll get good at it. It's
also having the attitude too.
Yeah.
You got to have the right attitude.
Yeah. Beginner mind always. That's always the key. Is everybody, there's always something to learn from everyone if you're willing to take the time to do it, and willing to clear your head of whatever ego you've got to, be available to learn something. Then I worked with Michael for off and on for almost 4 years. But Quincy was in the middle of that as well. We did some world tour stuff, a couple short movies and videos and that kind of stuff. So I was just in that production team for just about 4 years.
That's awesome. That's really awesome. Now I'm going to skip around a bit because you then made this transition to the healing arts. Where did that come from? What was the catalyst for that?
So I had always been a martial artist, starting, a white kid in America in the 70s. Chuck Norris, Bruce Lee, Jean-Claude Van Damme, all the ninja movies, like all that, back then, every Saturday morning was Kung Fu Theater.
American Ninja, man.
American Ninja, one of my, Michael, what's his name? One of my favorite movies of all time.
Yeah.
I actually own it on DVD.
That's awesome.
But I did that in my teen years, studied karate and began meditating then. But then when music took off, I stopped doing everything. Like midway through college till I was like 28, I didn't do anything. I just did music, 120 hours a week. That's all I did. And then like by the time I was 29, I had just finished producing Christina Aguilera. I helped her get her record deal, and I worked on her first record, and finally didn't have to work for 100 hours a week. I could choose to, or I could choose to actually like go to the gym and surf and start to be a little healthier. So I got back into martial arts, late 90s, and that started to have like a little bit more of a more balanced life, to some extent. Yeah. Still working 100-hour weeks, but knowing when to take a break. And then around, there's a lot of things that led to the transition. Number one is I could see the writing on the wall with live streaming, with file sharing. I knew the industry was headed to a place where it wasn't going to make as much money. And if anybody was going to make less money, it was going to be songwriters. It was going to be engineers. It was going to be the people, who are out of view of the public. So I knew part of me said, I don't want to go back to school when I'm 55. So if I'm going to go back to school for something, let me do it, in my late 30s. That was kind of the idea. And then I had a writing partner that I was married to. We actually did Christina Aguilera's demo. We got her signed. We worked on the first 3 records, and our relationship took a turn for the worse. Creative relationships, can be, when it's working, tricky. It's amazing. When it's not working, it's torture. So we got divorced, and I kept working, kept mixing and engineering, but I started to kind of look around and say, like, well, what else do I love? What do I love as much as music? Right? That could be a career. And all of my teachers, my Kung Fu teacher, my Tai Chi teacher, they're all acupuncturists. My kung fu teacher is a bone setter from Hong Kong. Like they all had Chinese medicine in their history. And then the real catalyst was after the tsunami in Sri Lanka. A few months after it, I went down to do relief work, and we were off in the eastern provinces where the Civil War was. So there wasn't a lot of there was no Red Cross. There was nobody there to help anybody.
Yeah.
And the Western doctors, when they ran out of drugs, essentially, when they ran out of material, they gave Pepsi to everyone. If you have a headache, Pepsi. You have a stomach ache, Pepsi. You have anxiety, Pepsi. Depression, Pepsi. Like, they had no tools. But the group that I was traveling with had an acupuncturist, and they were like, oh, let's get this local herb and make a tea. Let me do some tuina. Give me a spoon, I'll do gua sha. Like, they were so freeform in their ability to help people that it didn't matter that they didn't have needles or they didn't have their patent medicines or anything like that. And I was kind of like, that's who I want to be. So that was around 2005, and we kept going into 2006. And that started the transition. I didn't get to go to school until 2010 because it took like 4 years to kind of unravel a marriage that wasn't working, kind of set up my career, my income, all those kinds of things so that I could spend time in school. That was like, so there was that 3 to 4 year period of like unraveling a music life and inserting myself back into school. So 2010 is when I started Chinese medicine school.
That's awesome. And how do you find, that they ever play into each other, these two?
Constantly.
How so?
Oh, constantly. So I also teach in Yosan now. I teach at the school principles and theories of Chinese medicine, kind of the foundational courses. And the musicians understand the flow of everything better. They understand pulse better. They're more, everything in Chinese culture, as you know, in Vietnamese culture, nothing translates 1 to 1. 1 + 1 is never 2.
Nope.
There's always multiple layers going on. And in Chinese medicine, of course, the layers of understanding are completely contextual and related to this 2,000-year history that has moved and mutated throughout time. So that's jazz. I mean, it's right. It's never the same song twice. And as Westerners, like, we have a hard time with that. We want 1 + 1 to equal 2. We want it to be like, this equals that. And in Chinese culture and Chinese medicine, it never is. So I definitely see that musicians are more, and artists in general, are more able to adapt to that changing landscape. And the musicians in pulse, Chinese pulse is in both wrists, and you're feeling for these qualities that you're having to learn the translated definition of a Chinese word that may or may not be the same thing. But musicians understand tempo and quality, better than most anybody else, especially somebody who has no kind of artistic feel. To them, it's really abstract. But to a musician, you say like, oh, do you feel that tempo? Like, yeah, it's rushing. And actually you feel under your first finger, it's rushing. If you count right on the and of 4, it's actually rushing right there. And you can say that to a musician and they'll be like, yeah, I feel that. You're right. It rushes coming into the downbeat, right? But if you said that to somebody who's not a musician, they're like, I don't feel it rushing at all. I don't know what you're talking about. It seems very regular.
It just feels like a heartbeat, man.
It feels like a heartbeat. It feels like a pulse. So musicians definitely understand like those kind of intricacies, in a different way. And I love that. I feel like my pulse reading, apart from practice in general, of course, when I'm able to apply musical concepts to it, it makes a ton of sense.
One of the things that is really interesting too is that when songwriters, filmmakers, when I talk to these people about how they approach concepts, there's always the idea of tone too, that a song, a film, or something will have a tone. And I remember when I was in, I started out acupuncture school in San Diego. I went to a bunch of schools, which I actually really enjoyed.
Yeah.
I kind of learned a bunch of different things. And there was this really successful acupuncturist that had this practice in Hillcrest, San Diego, and I was interning there. Went by and just saw. I wasn't there a lot, but I came by and kind of watched just how things were done at his studio, or at his, not studio, but his practice. And one of the things that was really interesting is that he would set up his sessions like this. So you'd come in. There would always, of course, be music, but you were always greeted by someone with a cup of tea. You'd lay down, the room was dark. They would just you start off with a mini massage, put you down, face down. You come in, lay down on the table, you get a mini massage. Then you come in and someone comes in and does a hot towels and everything, kind of soothes you out. And then he comes in, checks your pulse, and does acupuncture. And then after that, you have your acupuncture needles in for 20 minutes. Then someone comes and pulls them, and then he comes in and does a little bit of massage. At the end, a little shoulder massage, and then you're on your way, right? And what was fascinating to me is that and I asked him about that. I was like, well, what are you doing there, man? Like, that's not the way that we were taught in school per se. And he's like, no, but I'm setting the tone.
Yeah.
And people come back. And the man had this, they weren't coming in just for a problem. They were coming in to feel good.
Yeah.
And it was interesting that, like, music has a tone. There's always this tone that a song sets. And it was interesting that when I looked at the healing arts, people that were successful in the healing arts, they would set a tone. And sometimes music was a part of that, aromatherapy, smells were part of that. It was just creating this space with tones.
Yeah. What's the space? And that's production as well. If you're going to record your wife for vocals and you need to do like a serious song or a ballad or something, and the baby's just been crying, the dishes are in the sink still, like, none of that is going to evoke, it still make it, she's talented, so she's still going to sing her ass off.
Well,
right?
But she had different. I actually had that. This is embarrassing to admit that it was just so recently that I had to shift things up, because every time we would try to record in our home studio, it was Chaosville, man. It was everything would fall apart, and then I would want to talk about a project that I had been thinking about and working on, and she comes in the second, and I just kill the mood for her, and then she's like, it's tough, and and then all of a sudden it clicked to me. I was like, what if this was, Michael Jackson or Christina Aguilera or someone like that walking into the studio, and I'm going, Michael, I've got this idea to pitch to you, or Christina, hey, do you want to hear about, what I was working on all day? You have to create a space. You have to create. So I was like, a month ago, I said, you know what? I'm going to totally redo art. And I went exactly like that guy. I had my candles, I had my special, I got some extra lights, I got some aromatherapy, and she walks into the studio and it is a peaceful place.
It's a totally different
now
thing.
Yeah, and I was like, I would love with my healing background to actually, I don't want to be a mix engineer, but I'd love to be the person setting the tone for recording spaces. Literally just to be like the person who's like kind of controlling the studio. I think that would be so interesting to come in with that knowledge set and be like last night we were recording, and it was funny because she had this one song and I could hear in her voice, and this I probably wouldn't do, but I could hear in her voice that her solar plexus was locking down. I could hear in her voice that she was not getting full breaths. And I said, all right, step away from the microphone, lay down. And I just did some massage, and I started working around the mid thoracic spine. And I knew that if I worked those points, that it's going to just relax the diaphragm.
Yeah.
Opened it up, and we did it. And I worked her shoulders in that space. And then afterwards she pops back up, and boom, she sang like a champ. There were full deep breaths happening, and it was a completely different tonal quality. And I was like, you don't see that. And I mean, if I ever have my own big studio someday, God knows, I'll have a massage therapist on staff.
Totally.
I'm gonna have an acupuncturist or massage therapist. So if that person starts clamping up, we get. All right, let's take a 15-minute break. Do some massage. Put some acupuncture needles in you.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally.
Why not?
I have so many years ago. I was doing this project in 2008. I was doing this project in China, and it was like a big ensemble record, and we had this big famous singer from Greece fly over, and a famous singer from Brazil. Very famous Chinese singer named Wei Wei was there. So we had all these singers flying into Beijing to work with us. And the singer, I won't say which one. One of the singers, the Chinese studio was at a university, and it looked like a converted basketball court. There was no vibe. It was just a control room and a big empty room. And she was like, "I'm sorry, Rob, I can't sing here. I know you guys have brought me all this way, but this is not what I'm used to." And I was like, "Give me 20 minutes." So I grabbed the Chinese assistant and I said, "Let's go." And we started walking around the university campus, and I'm like, "I want that couch." And they're like, "What?" I'm like, "I need that couch. I need that plant. I need that lamp. I need this carpet." And I started just accumulating stuff from around the campus. And we go back into the live room, and I built a living room. I brought the baffles in tight to the control room, set down the rug, the chair, a little couch, plant, lamp, music stand. I'm like, bottled water, and I set up a room, and I said, I went back out and I grabbed her and I said, "Come on into the room with me." And she walked in. She's like, "This is amazing." And we, and she sang and she nailed it. But we took someone, and all the record company people were like, "Wow, that was amazing. I can't believe you did that." And I'm like, "No, you just had to make her feel comfortable. You just have to
create a safe
shift.
space.
Yeah, you have to create this space. This singer is not going to fly whatever it was, 15,000 miles, to sing in a basketball court. Like, there's nothing cool about that. And then Michael Jackson was the king of that. Like, when he came to sing, candles, hot water, portable heat, like everything was just set up exactly how he would want it, and it was like, there was like a checklist, like, you do these things, when he's on his way in. Christina Aguilera is the same way. Though Christina Sessions, I'll throw her under the bus for a second, with all love to her. She would want to sing at like 9 or 10 at night. So we'd get the call, we'd show up at the studio, we'd get there at 9. She'd like, "Let's go to dinner first." So then we'd go to dinner. So around midnight, 11:30, be like, "Oh, let's actually go to this club first." So we'd go out and listen to music for a bit. And then there might be an after hours club. Then we get back to the studio at, say, 3, play ping pong for an hour and a half. And then around 5:30, let's go listen to the song. Around 6 a.m.
Oh my God.
Yeah. And then around 6 a.m., it was like, let's try this vocal now. And same thing. We'd have a whole room set up for her. The studio assistants would have like whatever water, coffee, tea combination. And it was the mood. That was,
I'm sitting there going, "Oh my God!" But she was setting the tone. The whole night was about
the entire night was a trajectory, was an arc of wherever she needed to be. And you know what? There were times at 5:45 or 4 a.m. we'd start the vocal, and she'd get one line in and go, "No, it's not going to happen. Let's do it tomorrow." And we'd do the same thing. And then she would have that one moment, and it was like the best vocal you've ever heard in your life. And those 3 days of trying are all worthwhile. Because even her walking in cold is an amazing vocal and better than most of us are ever going to dream of singing. But when you can take it to that next level, that one little extra, notch, it's worthwhile. So all singers need that. All musicians need that. Nobody wants to, very few people can really deliver a perfect performance or their best performance in a room that feels terrible.
If you could give some advice to your younger self or to someone getting into this, what advice would you give to someone?
Become an orthopedic surgeon. Don't do this. Are you crazy? Are you insane?
Yeah, right.
No, I say the same thing to people going to Chinese medicine and people going into music. Like, you have to be willing to bleed. Like, if you don't love this, and I go back to, I graduated from a school in upstate New York called Skidmore College, a small private school. And I've gone back to lecture there, and I tell them the same thing. Like, if this is fun and you think it'd be a cool way to make a living, you're probably going to burn out, or, it's going to be torture for you. But if there's nothing else you can imagine doing in your life, then you need to do this. But it's not a hobby, nor is Chinese medicine, as you know. Like, there's 2,000 years of history that you have to come to terms with, and a tradition, where 99% of the literature has never been translated. So
Yeah.
you are setting yourself up for a lifetime of study. So you got to be willing to throw everything down for it. And of course, I chose to do both, which means I'm maybe a masochist. I don't know, but they both things take up all of my time. You know, there's usually only 5 hours of sleep a night, depending on what projects I'm working on. So I think understanding that is the key. Neither one is to be taken lightly. I know that sounds kind of ominous and serious, but it's true.
No. It's true. You gotta love it. And if you're not into it 100, I'm the opposite. I stepped back from acupuncture school because there was a certain point in time where I was like, my heart and passion were in filmmaking and music. And I recognized that. And I wanted to do justice to mine. And I'm certain someday I will come back in full circle and I'll finish my degree. I'm 100% sure of that.
Yeah.
But at that time, right now, I'm on a different journey because you have to bleed for it.
Yeah.
And there was a certain point in time where you got to follow your heart, man.
Yeah. And when I stepped back from music, you know, and I never completely stepped back because obviously my career's continued to move on, and I'm still engineering and mixing. I just mixed the second of 5 albums that I have to mix before December. So I'm working a lot. But when I started acupuncture school in 2010, I was very comfortable with, I mean, I've had and continue to have, I had a great career. I mean, I worked with Michael Jackson and Janet Jackson and Quincy and Jam and Lewis and then Christina Aguilera and all the cast of musicians that go along with working with those people, like David Foster and Babyface. And I mean, the list is endless. Yeah. And, I took Christina from, so she had done the Mickey Mouse Club, had done a bunch of demos and they weren't happening. So they came to me after I'd worked with Quincy and they're like, can you do a demo with her? So we did the demo. We had her a record deal within 2 months of that. And then continued to work with her. By 2010, I was kind of like, I'm good. Like if I never do music again professionally, I could not have asked for a better career. I couldn't have asked. I watched, I recorded so many great musicians. I helped so many young singer-songwriters get their start. Another girl that we worked with was named Skylar Gray, who's written songs for Christina. So Christina and Rihanna and everybody. And I'm like, we got her record deal on Warner Brothers after doing a development deal with her. So there's this whole amazing family and cast of people that I got to work with. So it was I felt comfortable saying, making that transition and saying I'm cool, I'm good. I don't have any regrets in moving on. And thankfully music has continued and I still get to work with all these amazing people. I'm mixing a record right now for John Cowan, who plays with the Doobie Brothers, and Andrea Zahn, who plays with James Taylor. I'm doing their group record right now. Awesome. It's just an incredible record and I feel lucky to do it. The other record I just finished mixing is for a man named H.B. Barnum, who's Aretha Franklin's choir director. And
that's awesome.
Working with him on a gospel record with a Polish singer named Mietek Szczesniak. They're just beautiful records. And I'm lucky to get to do that. But it definitely, I think putting myself in the Chinese medicine world helps me appreciate those records more, because I'm not doing it to pay the rent, essentially. I get to make records now that I really love. They're all passion projects.
And that's huge.
It's everything.
Because that's what you're talking about.
It's everything.
You gotta
I mean, when you're tuning a vocal at 2 a.m. or you're having to recall a mix for the 30th time because somebody wants to change, 1/10 of a dB of the bass, you're like, if you love it, it's no big deal. But when it's torture, you're like, just let it be done. Pay me so I can get out of here. And rarely do I have those moments anymore. I just love doing it every minute of the day.
That's really awesome, man.
Yeah, it's a
well, brother, I appreciate this conversation, man. This was
thank you.
An awesome dive down some fun stuff. Well, we need to get you back on and talk some more fun stories. I'd love to hear some of these anecdotal stories and just hear you share some interesting, some fun wisdom drops too.
There's a lot of good stories in there to be had for sure.